I'm really proud to have the opportunity today to introduce our keynote speaker, Brigadier General Jen Buckner, who's the Director of Cyber, Electronic Warfare, Information Operations for the U.S. Army. She brings exceptional cyber experience to the stage today. She graduated from the U.S. Military Academy in 1990 and has been in numerous cyber and intelligence leadership roles ever since. She served as the commander of the 780th Military Intelligence Brigade, commandant of the Cyber School at the U.S. Army Cyber Center of Excellence, deputy commander for operations of the Cyber National Force at U.S. Cyber Command, and deputy commander of JTF Ares at U.S. Army Cyber Command, to name just a few highlights. She's also served at the U.S. Army War College as the U.S. Army War College Cyber Fellow at the NSA, and most recently completed Harvard's Executive Education Program in Cybersecurity. Please join me in welcoming Brigadier General Jen Buckner.
Thanks so much, Ted. I appreciate it. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for this opportunity to be a part of the National Cyber Summit. My first Cyber Summit, unbelievably, but not my first time in Huntsville, as Huntsville, many of you here, both natives and visitors, have been partners with many of our Army's efforts to date, so it feels like home. I offer my sincere thanks, Ted, thanks for the gracious introduction and for Booz Allen Hamilton's sponsorship of this event. Also to Carrie Miller for the invitation to be here today, from Deloitte and her commitment, personal and professional commitment to diversity and leadership in tech. To Megan Korn for her sponsorship here. And also to who I consider to be a national treasure here in Huntsville, Major General retired Barb Fast. You can't say no to anything that Barb asks you to, and her ties run deep across our intelligence and cyber community, and the fact that she's a fixture here in Huntsville, she indeed is both a local and a national treasure. And who can blame her? She was supposed to be here, but understandably took off on a surprise 40th wedding anniversary trip to wine country, so good for her. We give her a bye. I'm here today on behalf of Army leadership, and specifically the Army's G357, the Acting Director of Operations, Major General Charlie Flynn, as well as representing Army Cyber Command and Lieutenant General Steve Fogarty. He was here yesterday as a part of the classified forum. And always interesting. I learned something from him. He speaks on a number of different things, and he always is very transparent, so I'm going to reinforce a couple of his points here today. But both General Flynn, General Fogarty would reinforce their support and commitment and admiration of Cyber Huntsville initiatives. What a tremendous effort, grassroots effort, that Huntsville has undertaken in really investing in the development of cyber and cybersecurity talent for our nation, for our military, for the department, but most importantly for our nation. And I'll come back to the talent aspect of that, because I think that's one aspect that really unites us all in this. I do represent the Army, but I think the things that I'll talk about today really, I share the stage often with my service counterparts, and we all share kind of the same perspective and on what I would say today are three imperatives, and they represent how far we've come in cyber and where we want to go in cyber in the future. And those are readiness, risk, and integration. Now, I say we have come a really long way, and all of the services have made tremendous and significant investments in U.S. Cyber Command, and we all contribute national mission teams, combat mission teams, cyber protection teams, as a part of a joint construct, because we recognize that cyber is a joint fight. But now, as services, we also now take all of the things that we have done operationally, that we have learned building these teams, and that we have equipped with some significant high-end capabilities. How can we now bring that across every echelon of our service forces and represent those capabilities to fight with them at every echelon? And that's really where we're at next. So I begin with integration from a readiness perspective, and that is all of the services have metrics by which we would measure readiness. But for some reason, we now have cyber as this other part of it. And I'll talk to the Army specifically. We have brigade combat teams. Those are the units of action that we fight with. And we have significant readiness metrics for our fighting elements. But for some reason, cyber is, well, for understandable reasons, cyber is separate from that. So now we're really challenged to bring readiness into those things that we would understand are a part of presenting forces, that cyber and cybersecurity operational capabilities are integrated into all of our fighting elements. I think, interestingly, the Army has committed to growing our cyber forces at every echelon across the Army in terms of cyber, electronic warfare, and information operations. So this is significant top-line growth, and it's interesting that this was not in an era of constrained resourcing. This was not if we should invest in cyber, electronic warfare, and IO at every echelon. It was how fast and how much. So we will be soon growing. Actually, we're growing right now. We're piloting a number of efforts in which we will place an cyber and electronic warfare platoon in every brigade combat team across the Army. So that's a commitment to 32 brigade combat teams, as well as planning elements at the brigade level, at the division level, at corps level, at the Army Service Component Command level, and at our Special Forces groups. So that is top-line growth. We do that not knowing what equipment we will be putting in their hands, because we can't do this sequentially. So there is opportunity, and you will hear that the Army is doing a number of experimentation initiatives in order to figure out what cyber, electronic warfare, and information operations or information warfare capabilities we will put into the hands at every echelon of our Army. We pilot these efforts in a number of ways. Through our National Training Center rotations, through joint operations and intelligence assessments, through warfighter exercises. This is all about understanding where industry is in terms of some of these capabilities and what we can quickly put into the hands of our soldiers. A major difference in the way that we will resource these elements is that we've agreed that we cannot field everything to everyone, that we are comfortable putting high-end equipment into the hands of soldiers quickly, knowing that we might not be able to equip the entire Army all at once. So the idea that our European forces might have different equipment than our Pacific forces, and they might be fielded on different timelines, that's okay. Our intent is to pilot efforts to get those into the hands of soldiers quickly, and then to keep innovating and develop incremental capabilities. So this is a relatively new way of doing business. I like the idea that we're growing a force, and we're also in parallel growing the equipment or developing the equipment that we'll put in the hands. There's some risk associated with that. We might have equipment and not forces. We might have forces and not equipment, but we know that we can't afford to wait on either of those. There is significant opportunity in terms of industry. I highlight this too because it really represents a different way of evaluating equipment that we might put into the hands of our soldiers. And that is perhaps we've passed the time where we do cyber demonstrations or battle lab kind of demonstrations, but instead we look for opportunities to put equipment in the hands of soldiers in operational environments so that we can understand how they'll be used and how they operate in contested, congested, and degraded environments. So for those who have contributed to, for example, some really successful efforts, like our cyber Blitz exercises, those have been an annual thing since I think 2014 or 2015. This year we will not have a cyber Blitz. We are instead collapsing it on top of a major U.S. Army Pacific Command exercise called Orient Shield. So we don't have a cyber blitz, we have an Orient Shield within which we will demonstrate a number of capabilities that we had planned for an exquisite cyber event. That is kind of the intent of Army leadership, that we don't have cyber exercises and exercises, that we do all of it together. You'll also see that some extraordinary experimentation at our combat training centers. And the fact that we would actually put equipment in the hands of soldiers for these combat training center rotations also represents opportunities because we know that we can't do massive mobile training teams and advanced training. We have trained soldiers, and we're willing to experiment in these training center rotations just to see how they might be integrated. Because they're also informing the way that how we train and educate our commanders, how we train and educate our our intel support to these forces. So again, I highlight the idea that experimentation is the way that we evaluate capabilities today, as opposed to just in a pristine test or demonstration environment. That's also contributing, that's informing the way that we might understand how we assess a unit's readiness too. Again, so that we're not considering cyber as a separate part from readiness, but instead considering it as a part of all of our fighting elements and echelons. So tremendous opportunity there, and the idea that, again, we don't fully understand what we're putting into the hands of our soldiers, but the latest and greatest is our intent and our commitment for all of these experimentation and pilots. We also have the Rapid Capability Office has been a great partner to us in terms of bringing some of these emerging technologies to get them into the hands of our soldiers. And so that's really informing the way that we might consider acquisition on a much more accelerated scale. So again, I think real opportunity there, both for industry and industry partnership. I'd also highlight how this is informing some risk scenarios. It's been clear in some of the cybersecurity assessments that we've been doing. Many of you would be familiar with these. They are our installation readiness, we call them CORA-I, cyber operations, resiliency assessments, installation, and weapons platforms. How it is we would assess readiness associated with our installations and our weapons platforms. Now, the Army is committed to we have gone through assessments of most of our installations, and I think not waiting until we have a cyber assessment, but really rolling those into a much broader framework of mission assurance. And understanding where our physical security and cybersecurity, integrating those into more of a force protection posture for our installations. Also from assessing the vulnerabilities associated with our weapons platforms. These are really some difficult challenges associated with legacy production. That's our tanks that have been in production for decades, some of our current platforms and where we would assess our cyber risk, as well as future production, and again, not considering production and then cybersecurity, but really how we would have a holistic view of our vulnerabilities associated with weapons platforms. And again, great partnership with many elements here in Huntsville. Particularly, I learned a lot from yesterday's Red Team TSMO efforts. They are helping us assess our vulnerabilities, the National Security Agency, and we have service partners. This is not an Army-led effort. This is actually part of a much broader defense OSD-led effort so that the services would inform each other and we would share lessons learned from all of our different cybersecurity readiness assessments or risk assessments. And that's caused us to really consider risk from a different perspective. I'm not sure that we can afford to go back and address all of the vulnerabilities associated with some of our legacy production platforms. So understanding and characterizing risk associated with that has been a challenge for us, not only on the, a specific project manager or PEO, but really from a larger acquisition standpoint, and then conveying that in terms of, for Army leadership, what does that mean? So, whether it's a tank, it's an aerial platform, it could be a division TOC, and how vulnerable our comms are. That's been an interesting exercise, again, to characterize and understand risk, where we can afford to take it, how we can afford, from a resourcing perspective, address some of those vulnerabilities, and where we would accept greater risk. I'm still not sure we have all the vernacular that would properly convey the risk associated with some of our cybersecurity vulnerabilities. It's clear that we can't address everything in every platform for all threats. So again, tiering those threats has also been an exercise that we in the Army and we share across all of the services. The third point I'd highlight is the integration aspect, and this is also where I'd like to offer opportunity for industry partnership. So the Army is very clearly focused on 6 modernization priorities. So whenever I'm in, so my 6 are long-range precision fires, next-generation combat vehicle, future vertical lift, our network, air and missile defense, and then our training, our soldier lethality, of which soldier lethality includes a virtual reality training environment as well as a synthetic training environment. So even with some of the service leadership turnover, we will remain committed to those. Many of you are familiar with our cross-functional team construct. It's significant that Army leadership will, our CFT leads are not changing. I think we're committed to keeping them in place for 2 to 4 years, understanding that that's how we will ensure continuity and progress on these major initiatives. Great partner here in Huntsville with Wally Rugen and Future Vertical Lift. And then we have 2 cross-cutting areas. One you just heard from on the Booz Allen Hamilton video, the Assured or Resilient PNT, as well as our synthetic training environment. And there's some real opportunity to converge with our cyber range construct, both from a test and a training perspective as well. Now, where does cyber fit into this? So, there was some thought that cyber should have its own cross-functional team, but I highlight the fact that now cyber is integrated into and across and through all of those. So we will no longer present exquisite cyber solutions, but instead, when it comes to resourcing, understanding how cyber fits into those 6 modernization and those 2 cross-cutting capabilities. You can help us do the work on that because it's really hard we get a lot of exquisite capabilities, and here's how I think it can be used. But clearly our Army leadership is focused on those modernization priorities, so understanding how they fit into that, how they can be integrated into those is the most important thing that we do on the Army staff to ensure that opportunities, emerging technologies, and cross-cutting initiatives can be seen by Army leadership and properly prioritized and resourced. I think this represents tremendous opportunity, and my representation in the G3 also ensures that those cyber capabilities, that we understand how they can be operationally employed. General Flynn is really committed to understanding how all of these capabilities, these emerging technologies will change the way we fight. Thus, we sit in the G3, not in the intelligence specialty, although the G2 are critical partners. Not with the CIO G6, although cybersecurity and our network is a critical enabler and great partners. But instead, the operational employment of emerging technologies, that's why we sit in the G3, and we consider cyber from all of those different perspectives. So finding a CFT foothold is the way that we prioritize and get visibility for cyber, electronic warfare, and IO capabilities. We also frame those within a multi-domain fighting concept. And all of the CFTs will have to articulate how they fight as a part of this multi-domain concept. So when we are presenting things for consideration, for integration, we do so through that CFT lens. So an interesting opportunity. We're about 2 years into these cross-functional teams. I think only one soldier lethality has changed leadership, so there's tremendous understanding across all of our Army CFT leads in terms of what their priorities are, what they're focused on, how they will pilot them, and how we might consider resourcing them and fielding them, again, in much different ways. So an interesting time in the Army G3. I would also say that I am known as Demos Cyber, but I think in the near term we will become more of a Demo multi-domain. All of our services approach force development, operations, strategy, and force management in perhaps similar ways. So the G3 will continue to field the major elements of the G3, but cyber will actually merge with space, with fires. We already represent cyber electronic warfare and IO, and we will have a significant partnership with the CIO G6 in terms of cybersecurity. So it's this is the future of how the Army staff will be organized so that we can better represent these capabilities in that cross-functional construct and multi-domain way of fighting. That's relatively new, so perhaps first heard, but, and I look forward to how that's gonna, of course there's no more resourcing, so we'll figure out how we're gonna do more with less, but that's okay. And I would also highlight, I'd like to reinforce a couple messages that General Fogarty delivered yesterday. And that is, and I think on the same theme, he very publicly is struggling with the idea that perhaps calling things cyber is not the right way of approaching our fight. We would use the term multi-domain, but increasingly we're challenged to operate across cyberspace, electronic warfare, information operations in a much different way. The Department of Defense would call this the information environment. The Army, we are calling it information warfare. These are not yet doctrinal terms, but I think we realized from the last several years, particularly some counter-ISIS cyber operations, as well as some of countering malign influence against nation-state adversaries, has really caused us to look at this much differently. So I think in the near future, you'll see an evolution from just cyber, because when we say cyber, we mean it in such an expansive framework. But perhaps you'll hear information warfare, information dominance, still being battled around, but I think Army Cyber Command, when it moves from Fort Belvoir, Virginia to Fort Gordon, Georgia next year, it will be reflagged as an information warfare command because it represents a capability that is necessary as a part of U.S. Cyber Command and an increasing focus on not operating in single disciplines, but rather operating or integrating all of these cyber electronic warfare information operations in really a seamless fashion and bringing those not just at the strategic level, but at an operational level and a tactical level for our joint and service forces. So with that, I will conclude my remarks. They did ask me to field a few questions. So before I address any questions on some of the resourcing and industry partnership opportunities, I'd like to reinforce our commitment to some of the talent initiatives too. I never miss an opportunity, particularly in an audience like this. We all share a commitment to developing cyber talent. And I would call out, I know that Huntsville has a number of different initiatives. When we were standing up the Army's training and education platform in Fort Gordon and Augusta, Georgia, we partnered with Huntsville leadership, both on the military and on the civilian side, to understand how it is you do what you do. And Huntsville has been the model for what we have invested in as a part of our Army platform, our Army installation, because we can't just consider how we approach Fort Gordon, but we really have to consider how we operate as a part of a larger community, invest in those things. I'd also highlight some industry leadership in this, and the fact that many of you sponsor local initiatives, that you sponsor Gen Cyber camps, your coding camps, Girls Who Code, Go Girls Cyber Start, some of the cyber scholarship initiatives that you invest in so that graduates will have assured employment after they graduate with an accredited degree. And I think to reinforce one of General Fogarty's messages, the idea that this is not going to be solved by one federal entity and top-down driven, but instead it's a collection of a number of different grassroots initiatives, things that you do at the local level that really resonate and kind of rise up regionally and nationally. Those are making a difference. I recently had the opportunity to partner with to partner with the Partnership for Public Service, a nonpartisan nonprofit entity, trying to also partner with private industry in terms of incentivizing government service along with industry opportunities. And the fact that we don't have a generation that intends on joining federal service or the military for a 20 or 30-year career, but instead we'll consider 4 or 5 or 6 or different careers, and how can we partner with industry to develop those skills. So the Cyber Talent Initiative aims to do just that. It's one where we recognize the National Security Agency and Department of Homeland Security, their cyber accreditation exercises or accreditation for excellence, accredited programs, assured employment in the government for 2 years. After that, a worker can decide whether they want to stay in the government, or they can jump to a private company like MasterCard, I think Workday. There are several others. It ensures their employment. We repay their loans no matter what, whether you stay in government or go to the private sector. It's those types of things where government service, it's not either or. With private industry, it's and I love the way that we've found ways to on-ramp, off-ramp, on-ramp between all of these different things. And I think those grassroots initiatives, like many also here in Huntsville, are the way that we address some of the cybersecurity challenges. I know I saw Gary Warner in here too. I would shout out to Gary and the UAB program on cyber forensics. That's another example of a great initiative, a local initiative that now has both national visibility and impact. So hats off to you, Gary. I know I saw you somewhere in here. Yeah, thanks. Great to reconnect. And with that, I would open it up for questions.